Hello again. I have just a few more thoughts in advance of tonight's Zoom session. First of all, I want to encourage you all to guide those discussions by nominating the specific topics you want to discuss and explore each week, beginning with your own posted weekly essays and the comment threads that have piqued your interest, that you've contributed to, or that you just want to talk about. Don't overlook the extensive comments thread under last week's author posts, particularly including the discussion of why Darwin couldn't believe that a good God would create animals that feast on the living innards of others. He was calling attention to the classic philosophical problem of suffering or evil. We might want to discuss that further. It is a pivotal issue for many non-theists. I'd be interested to know how all of you react to Darwin's letter to Asa Gray that I mentioned under questions last week. In that letter, Darwin said, and Asa Gray was the American scholar who was also a theist and an evolutionist. And Darwin wrote, "With respect to the theological view of the question, this is always painful to me. I am bewildered. I had no intention to write atheistically." And in fact, in other contexts, whenever pressed, he would say that the whole question of a God was too large for the mind of humans. But here to Asa Gray, he says, "I own that I cannot see as plainly as others do, and as I should wish to do, evidence of design and beneficence on all sides of us. There seems to me too much misery in the world. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created the Ichneumonidae with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars, or that a cat should play with mice. Not believing this, I see no necessity in the belief that the eye was expressly designed. On the other hand, I cannot anyhow be contented to view this wonderful universe, and especially the nature of man, and to conclude that everything is the result of brute force." And so, again, I invite your comment. Can you persuade yourself of what Darwin could not? How? And returning again to the subject of my first landlord, but hang on. No, don't hang on. Come back to that later, maybe. I'd be interested in your comments on his statement in his 1922 book, Science and Human Affairs from the Viewpoint of Biology. By the way, if you are at all drawn to the line of thought indicated in this quote, that book in its entirety is free and available in the public domain on Google Books. But he says in a passage a few pages in that I find particularly appealing, he says, "The humanistic philosophy of life, which flowered in Greece and which has blossomed again, is not the crude materialistic desire to eat, drink, and be merry. It is a spiritual joy in living and a confidence in the future which makes this life a thing worthwhile. The otherworldliness of the Middle Ages does not satisfy the spiritual demands of modern times." Agree? And now for something completely different. This isn't exactly about evolution in America, but do you guys read Margaret Renkl? She's a Nashvilleian, lives in Nashville, and contributes a weekly column to the New York Times. She's consistently great. Her latest column, "How to Keep Music and One Another Alive," is subtitled, "If we want to experience concerts again, we need to support the artists we love until the pandemic passes. Here's how." And I thought, well, it's not entirely relevant, but it's not entirely not. And then I remembered something that Darwin said in his autobiography. He said he wished he'd listened to more music and read more poetry during his lifetime. So there's your hook to connect Renkl to evolution. Anyway, if you're not familiar with her, check her out and follow the link that I provided to some of her earlier columns. Now, I said a minute ago, hang on, because there was some new material that I wanted to address briefly before signing off here in a bit. First of all, in connection with that question about the Ichneumonidae feasting on the innards of the caterpillar, and whether that could possibly be compatible with the notion of a beneficent and good creator. My thoughts are these. I drafted these in response to one of our posts, one of the class's posts. The challenge for Darwin, which I also find insuperable, is to reconcile evil, defined as gratuitous suffering, with the concept of an omniscient, omnipotent, all-loving and all-good creator deity. This is the classic philosophical problem of evil, which, or suffering, I prefer the term suffering, comes with less supernaturalist baggage, which many non-believers will tell you is for them the single greatest obstacle to religious belief. The prevalence of what appears to be gratuitous, painful, pointless suffering in the world. This problem can be solved, quote unquote, philosophically, if not existentially, by denying that an all-knowing or all-powerful or all-good God exists. You could say no God of any sort exists, or a God of lesser powers exists, but either of those solutions seems unappealing to most believers. And so the issue is, it's a pretty profound one. It's not just about cat and mice games. It's the whole spectrum of suffering, loss, painful death, etc., that we see in our world, and that seems on its face to be without evident point or purpose. So that's the issue if we want to discuss it. It could be a rabbit hole of a topic, but it's a compelling one. But I should also point out that, as Asa Gray and other theistic evolutionists attest, it is possible to accept belief in a God alongside belief in evolution if the believer is prepared to grant that God must have good and sufficient reasons for creating cats that torture mice and other species of organism that inflict horrible suffering on one another, including humans. Darwin just couldn't believe it, and neither can I. Now then, returning to the subject of today's readings. John Scopes. In the light of the question that Dayton's trial instigators put to John Scopes when they're trying to really ultimately draw up publicity for their little town, the question was, is it possible to teach biology sans evolution? And Scopes said no, and later in the century, Theodosius Dobzhansky put it more succinctly. Nothing in biology, well, not more succinctly than no, he put it succinctly. Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. I find it also fascinating that Daytonites tried to lure British writer H.G. Wells to Tennessee for the trial to make the evolutionary case. Too bad he didn't come. That would have been a nice Matthew Chapman foreshadowing. But I can never think of H.G. Wells without recalling the 1906 letter that William James wrote to him, deploring, quote, the moral flabbiness born of the exclusive worship of the bitch goddess success. That, with the squalid cash interpretation put on the word success, is our national disease. We want to talk about that? And how about that WCFA resolution mentioned at the bottom of page 97 in Larson's book? Maybe just a bit over the top. Let's see, can I find it quickly? Page 97, Larson. WCFA is World's Christian Fundamentals Association, and their resolution commended Tennessee for, quote, prohibiting the teaching of the unscientific, anti-Christian, atheistic, anarchistic, pagan, rationalistic, evolutionary theory. Over the top, in my opinion. They really vilified that view. I never attempt to answer atheists, Brian says on page 104. Is that true, that he didn't attempt to answer atheists? He certainly baited non-believers with accusations of amorality and worse, just like the WCFA resolution there. Right. Judge Ralston, played in Inherit the Wind, by the way, by MASH's Colonel Potter, Harry Morgan, felt called by God to preside over this trial, he said. With that attitude, he probably should have recused himself, no? And another interesting point caught my eye. Clarence Darrow's father, like John Scopes' father, was an agnostic freethinker. This in Trials of the Monkey, page 70. Do your own views coincide with those of others in your household when you were growing up? Or do you find yourself holding views less traditional than your parents? What do you think of Darrow's defense of Leopold and Loeb just prior to the Scopes trial? Can we blame Nietzsche, but not them, for their horrific crimes? That opens onto the broader debate about free will and determinism and fatalism and all the rest. What's your answer to Chapman's question about the American infestation? There's another possibly challenging passage on pages 77 and 8. When he asks, why is America, a country where 98% of the people believe in God and over 50% believe in the literal existence of angels, why is this so holy place infested with serial killers, rapists, pedophiles, often men of the cloth, drug addicts, gangs, cults, and madmen? Are you offended by that question, or stumped by it, or troubled by it, or what? And how about this? I'll sign off after this one, I think. When pressed to declare himself heaven or hell-bound, hail-bound in Chapman's rendering, Chapman says, I'm from England. We think about things a little differently. That's on page 111. Well, I think maybe I'm spiritually and genetically. My paternal line goes back to Bristol in the UK. I think I'm from England, too, in the context of this question. I agree with Bertrand Russell, who said, I do not myself feel that any person who is really profoundly humane can believe in everlasting punishment. How about you? All right. I will Zoom with you guys in just a short while, and I look forward to it. Later.